There have been graveyards in Montgomery County for as long as there have been inhabitants. Archaeologists have discovered Native American burial sites, some dating back to 1200 AD. Once the Europeans arrived here, they too were faced with finding places to bury their loved ones. In earlier days, graves were usually in a family plot, either on a farm or off in a wooded area. As the county developed, graveyards increasingly appeared next to churches. With suburbanization, larger regional cemeteries began to develop and expand. Today, there are roughly 300 registered historic burial grounds in the county. Rockville Cemetery is one of the oldest of its kind in the country. The Rockville Cemetery began as a colonial burial ground in 1738. At that time, it sat on 2 acres surrounding a tiny chapel of ease. The chapel and the cemetery were associated with the Anglican Church. Today, it has grown to 28 acres and serves the community. Fifth-generation Rockvillian Dr. Stephen Cromwell is the president of the management group, Rockville Cemetery Association, Incorporated.
Well, this land was donated to the Anglican Church by Thomas Williams, who lived in the area and donated 2 acres of land to the Anglican Church for the building of a church. A small chapel of ease made of log and clapboard was built in 1739. It was enlarged in 1750 and again in 1755 as the number of parishioners increased in numbers. And by that time, people began to be buried around the church, as was typical with the Anglican Church in that time.
After the Revolution, Anglican churches became Episcopal. In 1822, this congregation moved to Washington Street, where they still worship today.
The Episcopal Church continued to use this as a burial ground for its parishioners. Other people from other denominations might be buried here with the approval of the rector and at least 2 of the vestrymen, but it was primarily an Episcopal cemetery. In 1880, however, the vestry decided to offer this as a community cemetery, and there were representatives from a number of denominations: the Methodists, the Presbyterians, the Episcopalians, the Baptists, and the Christian Church all sent representatives and to be on the executive committee and to take over the responsibility of maintaining the cemetery. That's how the name, the Rockville Union Cemetery, got started. It was never really the official name of the cemetery, but that's what it's been known as for many, many years.
The first president of the association helped to enlarge the grounds.
Judge Bowie lived over here at Glenview Mansion, which is adjacent to the Rockville Cemetery, and he provided an additional 5 acres of land to expand the cemetery area. And at the death of his wife, Catherine, in 1894, an additional 2 acres were offered there to further increase the area, which we now know as the upper part of the cemetery.
Since then, through various acquisitions, the cemetery expanded to its current size of 28 acres. There are simple stones, elaborate obelisks, as well as enormous mausoleums. Despite its recent growth, the cemetery still feels very historic.
Well, this is the gravestone of John Harding. John Harding was a farmer who lived up county and was a member of the vestry. When he died in 1752, he was buried here, and this is the oldest stone that we know of in the Rockville Cemetery. A couple of things of interest are the inscriptions on here. You'll notice that there is a skull and crossbone and an hourglass, and that was fairly typical of that period of time to have that kind of identification on tombstones.
Strolling among the headstones, one is struck by the familiar names. There's Poole, Claggett, Allnut, Prettyman, and Bell.
Upton Bell was the second clerk of the circuit court. The first clerk of the circuit court was his father, and they lived in Georgetown. And when his father passed away, he became the second clerk of the court. The community decided that it was such an important role that he needed to move out into Montgomery County, and he built a house on West Montgomery Avenue, which we know now as the Bell Dawson House, and is now the home of the Montgomery Historical Society. He was very prominent in the community and remained as the clerk of the court until 1823 when he passed away.
Up the hill, one finds the Stone Street family site.
Dr. Stonestreet is buried here along with many members of his family. Dr. Stonestreet was born here in Rockville. After attending medical school at the University of Maryland, he started practicing here in 1853, and he practiced here for 50 years and passed away in 1903. He became one of the most prominent physicians in town and treated individuals there for over 50 years, was beloved by everybody, and was actually probably one of the most prominent citizens in the town, was also a member of the original Cemetery Association when it was established in 1880.
Under a tree in a rather inconspicuous spot is the grave of Walter Johnson.
Walter Johnson was born in Kansas in 1897. He's better known as the Big Train because he pitched baseball here for the Washington Senators in the 1920s and was largely responsible for them winning the American League Championship several years running. After he retired from baseball, he became a county commissioner and lived on a farm in Upper Montgomery County.
The Bullard family is in this section.
The Bullards established Chestnut Lodge Sanitarium. Originally, this had been a Woodland Hotel, and it was closed in, I think, 1904. And Dr. Ernest Bullard, who was a physician from Milwaukee, bought the property and he turned it into a psychiatric institute. His son, Dexter Bullard, took over as a young psychiatric physician and made it one of the most outstanding psychiatric hospitals in the United States.
And a site that is very dear to Dr. Cromwell is that of the Veers family.
I'm a descendant from Miss Rebecca T. Veers. The Veers owned a farm out on Route 28 where now Lakewood Country Club is. Miss Rebecca was very active with the Cemetery Association, and in 1894 she and Mrs. Holland and Mrs. Offutt formed the Women's Executive Committee, and they came out here with the house servants and gardeners from the citizens of Rockville, and they cleared this land, which had been badly overgrown over the years, and restored it to a condition that the newspaper said was a place of serenity and beauty.
Currently, only about 50% of the available land is being used for burial sites. Rockville Cemetery Association Incorporated is dedicated to the preservation of the old while ensuring that there is room for the future.
This is a community cemetery, and our goal is to make it as attractive as possible, to restore the stones, to care for the roads that are in some disrepair. This is now a historic site, and we want to do our best to make it a place that the community can be proud of and that we can look forward to the use for another 100 years or so.